Good afternoon, Frank.
Hi, Professor.
As usual, there's a lot of new things happened this week that will give us something to talk about.
Oh, a lot of new things this week.
Globalization. The first thing that I've noticed today is that despite all the problems with refugees in Europe, and which seem to be getting worse and worse in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there certainly seems to be no welcome for them in America, in the United States. Canada, I see today, is welcoming 10,000 in Toronto by air today, and 15,000 by the end of the year, I think I saw.
Wow.
So it's interesting that the idea of refugees just deciding to go and being accepted is not losing out. It's losing out in some places. In Greece, a
Yes.
lot of them have been turned back from the Macedonian border, which is only allowing Syrians, Afghans, and one other group, I forget now which other group, to cross the border. And the others, and I don't know who the others are, and they didn't say, are being returned by bus, and now they're in Athens, and the Athenians are wondering what to do with them.
hmm hmm Well, I think that those leaders that are standing up and welcoming people, I think are going to go down historically as really being very, very strong and positive figures. I was pleased to see that Merkel was given the Person of the Year award by Time Magazine.
Oh, she was she?
Yes, yeah, and it was largely it was twofold. It was because of her leadership on the Greek debt crisis, and then of course most recently her leadership with the refugee crisis.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's what can be done. I mean, there's only two ways to go. You can't be indifferent about it. You either have to welcome them or you have to be you have to ban them
Well, it's very difficult to ban them, actually.
in practice. Yes, it is.
Uh, and it's the situation is getting worse and worse because of the winter setting in, and the fact that a lot of people are making a lot of money out of trafficking.
hmm
There's a lot still drowning in the seas, which of course get rough at this time of the year in the Eastern Mediterranean, between the Turkish coast and the Greek islands. With a family of seven.
I saw that.
So
Well, the Greeks have agreed now to accept European assistance at their borders. So there apparently will be a contingent of European border guards that will be helping them. So this hopefully will help the processing speed up a bit. Although,
anyway, I see this as the current stage, early in the process that's leading up to a crisis in the Western idea of democracy. Because you can't have a democratic system as we understand it unless people stay in the same place.
hmm
So they have to be voting members of a constituency.
hmm
Uh, so I think this is just one factor, which is very much part of what's going on in the world at the moment, that is going to lead up to a crisis of democracy. And another thing that we can see in the democratic processes at the moment is that three countries seem to be having difficulty organizing elections. Trump in this country is doing better and better in terms of candidacy for the Republican Party. The English democratic system, which has been a stable competition between two parties for a century, now has lost one of those parties to a very strange character, Corbyn, and nobody quite knows what to do about it. And Marine Le Pen in France just got, what, 30% of the votes in the
Yeah, the regional
elections? Yeah. So that shows that none of these democratic systems are working the way they have done over the past century.
hmm
And one wonders what's going to happen in the presidential election in France in 2017, I think, the British, next British election, because the Lib Dems aren't doing very well in England either.
No.
And it's the sort of thing that's going to increase the possibility of the Scots voting, demanding another referendum, and next time voting actually to leave the United Kingdom. And can you imagine an election in this country between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton?
I think in totality, I think in some ways what we're seeing is sort of the poisonous fruits of globalization, right? There's no process in history that's all positive or all negative. And globalization, as we often talk about, has many positive effects that come out of it, but also it has some negative effects. And in the United States with Trump, for example, I think we're seeing some of the negative effects that have come to the fore.
But it may lead to a situation in which we realize that we really have to rethink a system that has been working okay for 200 years and stop expecting it to last forever. Because I think some things absolutely have to change. The English system it's difficult to imagine what's going to happen in England, since it's relatively easy to change things there, and what we're losing in England is candidates for leadership. And I suppose that's a problem here as well, because none of the other candidates have shown very much, what should we say, charisma at any rate.
Well, I think I wouldn't be so. We often have talked about how the democratic institutions need substantial revision or something worse, more draconian. But I think in this country, at least, and I'll speak a bit about Le Pen and the British situation in a minute. But I think in this country, I think that Trump, when he talks about winning, I've won this, I've won that, he's talking about polls. No vote has been cast yet in this election by anybody. All right, everybody's at the same point. And on Monday, I was watching MSNBC as usual, and at about 7:30, they switched to a live feed of a Trump speech in South Carolina. He went on for 25 minutes before 5 minutes before the close of the hour. They got back on and made some comments. Professor, it was the most chilling thing I had ever experienced. I'm too young to have remembered Senator McCarthy from Wisconsin with the red baiting Senate hearings. This was absolutely appalling. And MSNBC is a very liberal network. They put it on for a reason. And when they cut back to the people in the studio, their faces were ashen. You could see the reaction that they all had, that this was something that was beyond the pale. And I personally think that I don't think there's a chance that he's going to get the Republican nomination. And I don't think there's a chance that he's going to win the presidency.
So, well, I'm inclined to agree with you, but I'm puzzled that he's managed to top the polls for so long.
Well, you have to look carefully when they ask, when the polls ask the question of those who are likely to vote and who have voted in Iowa in the past. Iowa is a weird situation. People show up in county party halls, big church basements, and the name of a candidate is read out, and people have to physically get up and walk to that corner of the room where the candidate's main supporter is standing holding the candidate's name. So at the end of the hour-long process, there are 7 or 8 or 10 different candidates. There are 7 or 8, 10 clumps of people in the room that then are counted by a neutral individual, and then it's reported. So the question is, when the question is asked, for example, of Iowa voters, if they support Trump, they can ask it two ways. They can say, have you ever voted before, and do you plan to vote this January? In that case, he doesn't do well. He barely is ahead of, I believe, Cruz. If they ask the question of everybody, then he has his huge pluralities of 35, 32%, whatever it is.
So do the others do better than him if they ask the limited question?
He's still on top, but only by 1 or 2 points. All right. And there's a second point here, and I'll go ahead and say it. He's appealing to fear, and the demographics of the people that are supporting him are white, high school educated only, and often unemployed or underemployed. These are his people, and I mean, fine, they're part of the country, they're citizens, they're brothers, fellow man, and all this stuff, but they're not representative, certainly of the voting populace, not by any stretch of the imagination.
No, this sort of thing I'm aware of, but I'm still puzzled that none of the other candidates have said anything that's grabbed the headlines.
No, well, they're afraid. They're afraid, and to be candid with you, I'm most disappointed. Well, I don't want to get involved in specifics, but I think people are afraid. They don't want to come out with anything because they're afraid of Trump. They're afraid of his mythical legions of 35% support,
Uh-huh.
where it's pretty clear to anybody who reads the papers closely, and it should be clear to the polling via the polling data that these guys have access to, that this is it's a mirage. It's not there.
So the first primary is the 1st of February?
I bet it's probably then. Yeah, that would be Iowa, the caucuses.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So it's going to be
and
very interesting to see just how it develops once the primaries start.
well, that's the question. Will people get up in Iowa in front of their neighbors, all right, and relatives, and walk across the floor to stand in that clump of people surrounded by a Trump sign? I don't know. I don't think they will. I don't think
Well,
they
I
will.
wouldn't think so either. I wouldn't think so either. But and I think actually that it's good to have somebody like this in the campaign because it makes everybody else think
Yes.
in a
Yeah.
way that if everybody was just saying, what should I say, things that are not in any way innovative, but the same old things that we've heard on and off for a long time, it would be much more difficult for anybody to make a mark. But I think that it should be possible for somebody to come out and appear to be the what should I say the right person for the
Yeah, he
Republicans.
he has certainly served as a lightning rod
Mm,
for a number of issues that
that's good.
everybody beats around the bush about, that now are going to have to be discussed.
Yeah.
And I think in some respects, I mean, Corbyn is probably doing this in a much more muted manner in England. Um,
Well, he's doing it in a very different way. Uh,
he is doing it
other
differently,
end of
yes.
the political spectrum. And it's very interesting that he got the support that he did, and it's a big puzzle to me that how it actually worked. But for the time being, he's still there, and it's not long before there's going to have to be an election, and there's nobody else who really rivals him for the leadership.
Hmm. When is the next election?
I think it has to be in.
It's a ways yet because
It's
Cameron was just reelected.
yeah. It's but it's not.
It might be
That's right. No, that's right. He was
it
re-elected.
might be 2018.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well, no,
there's some
it doesn't have to be until 2020.
that yeah. Well,
Um,
it's again, it's possible that he's keeping the seat warm until I mean Labor was I think so disenchanted by the results the last time that they're probably just finally beginning to come around to figuring out what they're going to do next.
but I think we go through periods like this, and have done at least since the middle of the last century,
Hmm.
in most democratic countries, that sometimes there's a dearth of leadership.
There is, and for
Sometimes.
good reason. I mean, look at what we see. Who in their right mind would want to get involved in this? I hate to say that, but
Well, some people should be seeing it as an opportunity.
well, this again, this is the question about globalization and empowerment. If the individual feels empowered enough to be able to affect a couple of concentric social rings around him or her, then why go any further?
What about the French situation?
I think she's the same as her father. I think she's a fascist.
She's it's interesting that that's getting well. She's a lot more careful politically than Trump is.
Yes.
So and therefore stands a much bigger chance of really getting a sizable vote in the next
Mm-hmm.
election, which isn't that far away.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly going to change French politics, I think, because it's what should we say, nationalizing it. It's getting away from this idea that everybody can be French; they just have to speak the right language,
Right. Right.
to the idea that there's a national culture and everybody's got to assimilate to it. Uh,
Well, yeah, I think I think what's going to happen is the issues that have been brought now into the fore in these three countries. I mean, it's not isolated to these three countries. It's now everywhere. I mean, people are going to have to begin to do some soul searching on a national level, right? Because the average American, I mean, we were just joking before the broadcast. We are talking about the 10,000 Syrians who are going to arrive in Toronto. And I said, well, we should go up there. And there was some joking back and forth with some other people of mine saying, oh, no, actually, we shouldn't go up there. But the bottom line is that I know that that individual would welcome people like that into his town in a heartbeat and has done that. It's just a question now of what do we stand for as a people? What do people, and not just as Americans, not just as English, not just as French, but in the year 2016, we're almost there,
it's
as,
the
as a collective member of this collective society, I mean, what do we stand for? Do we stand for ostracizing people and keeping people out? It's, I can't see that we're there. I just,
it, globalization. We're in the crucial phase of globalization, which is the conflict between the people who want change faster and faster and the people who want to hold on to the values that they've treasured for the last 100 years.
well, if holding on to the values that we've treasured for the last 100 years means open door policies and no discrimination against people because of ethnicity and
It,
religion, then
doesn't mean multiculturalism. It means our culture. And that's exactly the struggle that I think is going to get worse in the coming decades for a while before things even out and we get used to the fact that everybody gets used to the fact that they're definitely going to be different in a more global society.
well, I hope you're right.
Well, I'm an optimist.
You have ended this broadcast many times by saying that. All right, Professor. Thank you very much, and we'll talk again.